Hello and welcome to Risk at Work, Risk Connect's educational web series. I'm Scott Fenstermaker. I'm the VP of Digital Marketing. Today, we're going to talk about how to do a risk profile, a key risk report that actually adds value. If you've seen our guest on Risk at Work before, you know you've probably heard him rag on risk reporting a little bit. In ERM, we have the heat maps very famously. Uh, that type of reporting, as has been stated before, can oftentimes do more to elide its main purpose than it does to support it, which is to say, it does not support the questioning of risk matters within an organization. It does not lead to conversation. True risk reporting, when done well and done right, should be a byproduct of meaningful inquiry into probable outcomes with the goal of improving decision-making within your organization. If it's not leading to conversation, it is not creating value. So today we're going to talk about the type of risk reporting that is a tool that can improve transparency, improve conversations in your organization, and actually lead to preferential outcomes. And I know you can't wait to hear our guest today talk about this. A couple of items right before we begin. If you have questions for our guests, number one, please put them into the question field of your webinar software. If the question is not answered during the course of the presentation, we'll reach out to you directly and get you an answer. Also, if you elected that you would like to receive CPE credit for attending this presentation, watch your inbox. After we're done here today, we're going to send you a short quiz, 3 questions. You fill it out, you send it back to us. We will reply to you with your CPE credit. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Friend of the webinar, consultant, author, and lecturer on enterprise risk management. His program at Hydro One is now the subject, or has been for some time, the subject of a Harvard case study. He is a regular lecturer at York University's Schulich School of Business in Toronto, in addition to having also lectured at Harvard Business School, Ryerson University, and Carleton University. He's the co-editor of the textbook, Enterprise Risk Management, Today's Leading Research and Best Practices for Tomorrow's Executives, now in its 2nd edition. Please welcome back, you know him, you love him, Rob Quail. Rob, how you doing, man?
Hi, Scott. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
You better be good after an introduction like that, man.
Yeah, it was good.
We do our best to make you feel welcome here at Risk at Work. We love you.
It's a beautiful sunny late morning here in Toronto. Leaves are still on the trees. I think I said that right. So yeah, it's good. What is there to complain about?
Well, fabulous. Well, now I've set you up, so now everybody is going to expect this extraordinary thought leadership in the area of risk reporting. So with no pressure at all, why
Oh,
don't you take it away?
I'm excited. I get to rant about my favorite rant subject, which is about reporting. So let's back up a little bit. So in past webinars, I've talked about the fact that enterprise risk management is different in different organizations, depending on their business, their strategy, their environment, and what their competitors are doing. But in order to be able to say you're doing ERM, you really need to have 4 things. You need an articulated framework and process about why we assess risks and who's going to do what, role of the CEO, role of line management, role of your head of risk management. You need to have some kind of criteria so you can determine what risks are and aren't okay for you in terms of the pursuit of your strategy. You need to apply it to key risks and also, really important, integrate into other business processes. And then you need some kind of reporting. And all that could come down into conversations, driving conversations, as Scott mentioned in the introduction, and better decision making. So we've done webinars on the framework and process in terms of roles. We've talked about criteria. There's one on risk appetite and one on risk criteria. Last time we talked about application to key decision-making processes. So that was the previous webinar. You'll find all these on the Risk Connect's website. Today, I'm going to talk about the topic that, in my opinion, gets too much attention, bottom-up reporting on key risks. And in particular, the granddaddy of all bottom-up reports, the key risk report or risk profile. This normally gets presented with some frequency to a board or other oversight body. So what do I mean when I say this gets too much attention? I regularly speak to senior and middle managers in my client organizations whose only interaction with the risk management group is feeding of reports and reporting tools and quarterly reporting cycles. ERM isn't seen as a tool for better decision making. It's just there to describe or justify choices already made or keep senior management or oversight groups happy and out of their hair. I similarly had a meeting with a fairly recently minted chief risk officer in a mid-sized, quite complex organization who had been running their program for about 3 years and was having trouble getting real engagement and traction of the kind she'd like. So I asked her what she had in place. She said she'd done a lot of work setting up a network of about 50 risk champions across the business whose new extra job was going to be to identify risks and report them back to her for inclusion in quarterly board risk reports. She was planning on doing a whole bunch of training on how these champions are to do this reporting, and she's planning to issue an RFP for a technology solution to help do this. So her entire ERM program consists of upward reporting. Now, I'm not saying throw out reporting. I'm not saying that data and powerful IT tools can't be a huge source of power. In fact, in a complex organization, a dynamic environment, you need technology to help enable it. But it's not the whole point. It's an enabler, it's a byproduct. If the processes you go through and the products you deliver in generating reports don't positively affect decision making in visible, identifiable, trackable fashion, they're of no value, none. Having said all that, there are some expectations and obligations of boards regarding risk reports, of which we should all be aware. So let's touch on that very briefly. So this is from COSO's guidance on ERM. First of all, a board should understand the philosophy and concur with the risk appetite. They should know the extent to which management's established effective ERM. They should review the portfolio of risks against the appetite and ultimately be apprised of the most significant risks that management is looking, how management is responding to them. A well-crafted enterprise risk management key risks report or risk profile can assist with all three of these. It gives some insight into what the ERM program looks like. It's, of course, gets a view of what the universe of risks are and where things are relative to the appetite. And then ultimately it gives a deep dive into some of those key risks. So there are at least 3 boxes you need to tick in the process in terms of your reporting. But that's all I'm going to say about expectations of boards. Because again, the focus of our conversation is not to make the board go away. It's to build value, drive new conversations, make better decision making. So a well-crafted report can support these 3 while it's doing other much more important things. So what is a risk profile? It describes for a board or other oversight body the principal risk to the successful realization of the strategy. So it's risks to the strategy. And because you're describing risks, which are in the future, you need to specify a horizon. Typically, and for most organizations, it's 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer, depending on the complexity and pace of change. It can also include a discussion on longer term risks outside the horizon that are less well understood and subject to more uncertainty. We typically call those emerging risks. It also needs to be a point in time, as at a specific date. So like a financial statement, it will be out of date almost immediately after you send it to the printer, but it's a point in time. And then finally, it's periodic. This is something I get asked often. How often should we do a key risk report? The frequency really depends on the volatility of the business. In a more rapidly changing environment, there's value in reviewing key risks and talking to C-level and board about them more often. It also depends on the specific expectations of your board, of course, and whether it's used as an input to other things like strategic planning, which is an excellent integration point I think we talked about last time. Annual or semi-annual is often the default, but I wouldn't jump to one of those without first thinking through how often do risks change and how often do we need to reconsider our key risks and make sure that we are pursuing them appropriately. Who owns it? So a key risk report is a management tool to help the chief executive communicate with those to whom they're accountable on the key risks to the organization. So remember this, it's the chief executive's response to the most significant risks to the strategy. So therefore, it should reflect the CEO's understanding and tone, where prepared by you or some other body other than the CEO, it nevertheless needs to be done as a service to the chief executive. When it gets delivered to the board, it needs to be under the CEO's signature and not the chief risk officer's signature. This is not an independent thing. This is the CEO saying to the board, here are the principal risks to the strategy, and here's how I'm handling them, and here's the plans I have ahead, and here's the residual risk we're accepting. And then why is it useful? There are a few things about that, and I want to tell a little bit of a story about the first one on visibility. Way back in, I guess it was 2000, the year 2000, that's before you were born, I think, Scott. We had our first key risk report to our board of directors at Hydro One. It was sort of a prose description. We didn't do a lot of measurement, but it was kind of a summary of the key risks that were of concern to the executive team and chief executive officer at the time. And it was delivered to our board and it was very well received. And I remember this like it was yesterday. We left the board meeting. We went back into the CEO's office. She closed the door. She said, "This was a great discussion. I'm not convinced, though, that my direct reports have a common view of these risks. Can you help with that?" And that is arguably the most important question I've ever been asked in my career, because that led to a whole bunch of activity around workshops and involvement of executive teams. So my point is, by generating this report, you have an excuse, a hall pass to go and talk to your chief executive and your executive team about key risks, and might even have a hall pass to introduce things like workshops and other interactive exercises to get more visibility to ERM as a tool to solve problems and provoke useful conversations. There's also reinforcement of line ownership. As I said, it is the chief executive officer's product. So there's clarity there. And in the process of boiling up key risks and identifying champions and assigning actions, you also clarify accountability for ownership of risk through the line organization. And then finally, you can build a shared understanding of risks and responses. So there's learning through the course of assembling one, through either workshops or interviews. You're going to build a better understanding of risks, the strategy, the approach that other decision makers in the business are making to manage those key risks, and so on. And as I said, it can be an input to strategic planning. It's a point of time view and key risks, and therefore it's useful for that exercise. So how? So here are some things that I've seen organizations do. Take some numbers from some kind of risk registry or other tool. You consolidate some reports, sit at your desk, you pile them up, you pull some things from them. You'd look at last quarter's report and see what's gone up, what's gone down. You might send out some emails. Maybe you'll get some people in the room and do some brainstorming. I've seen all these things. All of these represent a missed opportunity to have what we're talking about here as the key thing in ERM, conversations about priorities with the most important people in your organization. Those first three, looking at results from a GRC tool, looking at other reports, updating last year's, obviously powerful parts of the process, but that's not the whole thing. The last two, for reasons I won't get into now, unless Scott wants to interrupt me and ask me about them, is email surveys of key staff and brainstorming. Those are two things that actually I don't particularly recommend as tools for getting engagement in ERM. Remember,
But why?
what?
But why? But why, Rob? Why
So
would you not
surveys.
recommend those
So,
tactics for?
sure. So surveys. It's never happened once in human history that someone has sat at their desk and completed a survey, and then at the end of it said, "Gee, I sure am glad I did that. That was a great use of my time, and I learned a lot." Ever. And yet, you want your brand in ERM to be about good use of their time, learning a lot, making better decisions. So don't do surveys. I have, in 23 years of being a risk in ERM, never once done a survey of staff, and I won't do one. You'd have to shoot me first. The second thing, brainstorming. The problem with brainstorming is it's so subject to cognitive bias, recency effect, availability heuristics, system one kind of thinking. So just sitting in front of a white blank whiteboard and saying, "What do you think could go wrong?" is not a good way to get key answers on what priority risks are. It's just a good way to get what's on top of people's mind at that moment on that day. So what should you do? Well, in this webinar, I'm going to talk about two things: interviews and how to get alignment through them. And very briefly, I'm going to touch on workshops. In fact, let's dispense with the workshops topic first. And again, I keep referring back to prior webinars, but there is one that you'll find on the Risk Connect website. And also there's a chapter in our book about how to plan and facilitate risk workshops, including risk workshops that are for specific to this kind of purpose, where you're trying to boil up key risks across the organization. But the reason why I'm so big, I mean, risk workshops, you're putting structure around a conversation, and it's about the future. It's ideal for the kinds of things we want to get out of key reporting. So not only do you get that, you get learning about ERM. So you don't have to do any training. Remember I said I don't do any surveys? I also don't do any training. I don't sit in front of a flowchart of the COSO or ISO process and drone on and on about how the process should work, because you don't have to. In a risk workshop, you can demonstrate how it works. You take people through a risk assessment. You show them how it works and demonstrate how it improves decision making. So it's learning about ERM. People are going to learn about the business. So they're in a room talking about things they don't normally talk about. It's for some reason, it's just not normal for decision makers, high paid, highly effective decision makers, to sit in a room together and talk about ways they might fail. It's just not in their DNA. But that's what you're doing in a risk workshop. So it's an important conversation that will yield new learnings. Thirdly, risk workshops are very rapid ways to get from a messy, uncomplicated, ill-understood problem to a course of action. And then finally, there's this whole truth to power thing. It's again this unnatural process of talking about ways we might not meet our goals. And of course, that's a very healthy part. It's particularly if the chief executive reacts appropriately to that news, that can be a very effective way of improving a culture where people are comfortable telling truth to power. So that's it in terms of risk workshops today. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. We're going to go, if you want to know more about how to set them up and plan them and why they're so great, again, reference the webinar from a couple of years ago. So interviews, that's the thing I'm going to spend more time on today. Um, this gets you FaceTime with, I mean, the expectation of preparing a key risk report is, as I said earlier, your hall pass. Go and talk to all the key decision makers in your organization. And what you need to do is make sure that both you and the people you interview get something of value out of that conversation. So there's some challenges there in doing that. Just sitting down and asking about risk isn't going to get you much validity. You're going to get preconceptions, you're going to get a cognitive bias, you're going to get inconsistent thinking, you'll have no way of dealing with the results. So you need some way of injecting facts into this as opposed to just a plain whiteboard. You need to make efficient use of your time secondarily, but primarily decision makers' time you're talking to. And I'll talk about that a little bit later about how to make sure you make good use of their time. You want them to see these interviews as something that's a useful use of their time. You want them to look forward to them. And I will tell you, we had a few senior execs at Hydro One when I was in-house there who would actually did look forward to them so much they would do pre-work and send them to me in advance of the meeting because they wanted to make sure they got everything out. Like they would invest time in it. There really was a highlight. Their eyes would light up when they saw a risk profile interview on their calendar. I never saw them
Must
see it
have
on
been
their
some
calendar.
you must have a really good system for these interviews
I
because
do.
that's that seems strange to me.
And then the challenge of how to resolve different perspectives. So you're going to hear, if you interview 30 people, you're going to hear 30 different opinions. So how do you pull them together? So I'm going to take you through a process that overcomes or helps you overcome all three of these challenges. Basically, you're going to gather some information, all the available information. You're going to prepare some things you're going to use during the course of the interview. You're going to schedule and conduct the interviews, and I'll give you some tips for how to do that effectively, and then analyze and crunch through the results and come up with a plan for how to communicate it. Um, so first of all, gathering background information. This is to provide a factual backdrop for your discussions. So anything that can result in a more informed decision and more analytical thinking is useful to pull together in advance. So you want to look at things like in terms of changes in either the actual state of or our understanding of external events. So economic conditions, regulatory change, competitive position. Internal events, so loss events, start or completion of initiatives, actual results, trends. Our strategy and how we're measuring progress towards it. So changes in goals or in KPIs or the way we interact with those. The quality of internal controls. So you may have access to internal audit reports or control self-assessments. And what's going on at lower levels of the business. So you have been busy doing other things, helping people throughout the organization do assessments like as might be depicted here, where we have a bunch of assessments we've done on aspects of human resources, and you can start to bubble those things up and you have that information available for sharing in interviews. So in other words, you're asking, what has happened since our last iteration? How is our understanding of risk sources or risk events or the state of mitigants changed? And therefore, what are some of the key themes that you need to explore through interviews? What has changed or is likely to change? What's going on and who can you give you the most insight into these things? So if there's a lot of volatility in the area of the business, you might want to plan both the materials you prepare and who you talk to and what you expect your report's going to look like to focus on those areas where there's been a lot of change or there's a lot of uncertainty. So secondly, we prepare some background materials. As I said before, do not just walk in blind and talk about risks. You need to prepare some things in advance. So here's some things that are useful to have in a folder that you can put on the table during your discussion. First one is a summary of your key strategic objectives. So you need to start there. The ISO definition, effective uncertainty on objectives. You might be missing some things you care about in your objectives. There might be some things that are not areas where the business is where the business is not moving the dial. So there may not be a strategic goal for that area, but you need that on a piece of paper. So for example, if you're not really focused on improving, say, uh, occupational health and safety performance because you're already really great at it, you still want to have that on the page so people remember and it twigs that that's one of the things they're thinking about. Um, you also want a kind of summary of past events. And what I advocate that risk managers do is maintain on the side of their desk what you might call a media summary or event summary of key events. So as things happen, as there's political change, as there's change in regulation, as events happen inside, as you read about stuff in the paper that's happened to competitors, suppliers, customers, stakeholders, write those things down with the date so that you can present to interviewers in front of them. Here's what's changed since the last time I talked to you about key risks. And I'll often organize it using a model like PESTEL, political, economic, societal, technology, environmental, and whatever else stands for. um, Legal, thank you, or some other framework that works for that. But what you want to do is a bullet point summary just to remind them that stuff has changed. Um, the idea of a past event summary is something actually we introduced about 2 or 3 years into our process because people would say, well, nothing's changed since the last time I talked to you. It was only 6 months ago. So this is to say, well, no, in fact, 2 of our competitors went broke. This new area of regulation happened, we went live with this new ERP, and it's been a real mess. 30% of our staff left in frustration. We had a strike, whatever. And then similarly, one of the things I ran into is people would tend to focus on what's immediate. So when asked about risks, they tend to think about this week, this month, this year. So a product I introduced was something what I called a risk calendar. So looking beyond the next quarter or year. So looking at each of our key risks, say, suppose these are our key risks, and looking out over the next 5 years, what are the things we know are going to happen that could either add or subtract risk? So go lives of systems, a new election, maybe a collective agreement expiring, some go live or completion of some kind of project. So plotting those things out and putting them in front of your decision makers helps them raise their gaze beyond the next quarter, the next year, which is what they're used to thinking about, and looking further down the road in terms of longer term implications. So that's a risk calendar. That's something I would absolutely make sure I have with me when I go into a key risk interview with someone. Another thing that's useful to have is some kind of point of reference on key risks. Remember I said before a whiteboard, a blank whiteboard is not a great thing to start with. Well, the good thing is you should have assembled some kind of universe or inventory of key risks, credible risks that might affect their business. And you want to put that in front of them to avoid blind spots. So something maybe like a model like this, where we have human capital, people, money, assets and technology, external environment and results, or maybe something that uses the Annette Mike's Rob Kaplan model. If you watch my previous webinars, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just Google Kaplan Mike's framework, and you'll come up with this model about preventable risks, strategic risks, and external risks. But some kind of organized structure around risk that you can put in front of them so we don't have a blind spot. The other thing is to recognize that these are not discrete things. So this model, like all our models in risk management, are imperfect. Things like, say, government policy, can uncertainty can drive all manner of other things like regulatory change, financial environment, competitor action. Human capital risk can affect all manner of performance in this figure. So these things don't happen in isolation. And one of the things you want to explore during interviews is how they interact with one another.
Should this correspond roughly, that schematic, to what risk managers might already be keeping in their risk manager? It's just not, excuse me, in the risk register. It's just not perhaps organized in the same way.
Yeah, for sure. So if you have a risk register, a taxonomy of risk that you use for bubbling up stuff, things may be embedded in whatever tool you're using to gather risk information. This should sit on top of that.
Sure.
You make your job easier if then when you're setting up that structure, you retain these high level categories. And then if you're going to build multiple hierarchies, explode these ones down into lower levels so that your roll up can something you can automate using your tool, your risk management tool.
But right now it's just it's a framework to make sure that you've thought of everything, right? Or that
Yes,
you've thought of every category, right? It's a blind spot eliminator.
correct. And
Yeah.
often in an interview, what I'll do is I'll go through each of the categories and get them to pull out one or two that they think most worthy of discussion or higher level of concern, and we'll explore those a bit. And I'll use that, and I'll talk about it a little later, to explode into some areas. That there's some areas they might raise that might cause you to go down certain avenues. I'll talk about that shortly.
Sure.
You're also going to want criteria. So criteria is a topic I've previously done a webinar on. It's much neglected. This is the thing that determines what's acceptable and what's unacceptable for the business. I'll bring criteria to interviews as a necessary reminder of how much risk is too much. We're not assessing all the risks using the criteria. We're not getting 2.3, comma 8.4, but you still need to have something that helps remind them that we're very averse to risk to, say, our reputation, and we're open to risks related to how we do new technology development. And then prior risk rating is very important. Put in front of them. This is the ground thing. So inevitably, it's going to happen that some of your risks will have changed, and you want a story. You want to start building the story for how you're going to explain the reason for that to first the chief executive and the board. So you want to put in front of them, here's what you said it was last time. Now you're saying it's this. What's changed? So you need that basis for point of reference. Okay, so who to interview and for how long? At the minimum, you're going to interview the chief executive, all their direct reports, and any sort of key functional leads in the business. Also, if there are things like major transformation initiatives going on, or you've got a very active mergers and acquisitions program, or there's something really big going on in the area that has the potential to add or destroy value, there's lots of uncertainty, there's complexity there, you might want to talk to people who are in charge of that area of the business as well. For how long? 30 minutes. No more, no less. 30 minutes. Now, this may seem like a lot. It may seem rushed at first, but you got to get in the habit of making super efficient use of their time. So 30 minutes per interview, regardless of level, regardless of complexity, 30 minutes. In fact, I prefer to end early and say, hey, guess what? You've got 2 or 3 minutes of your day back. The other point is that sometimes they will want you to interview them in groups. I decline politely. I prefer to interview people one or at most two at a time. If you get a room full of people or the boss and some of their team, then a lot of the time is going to be taken up with the subordinates demonstrating to their boss how smart they are, how much they agree with their boss. So you want to avoid that kind of scenario. In terms of the CEO, I would do them ideally at the beginning and at the end of the process. At the beginning to get their sort of overall view and help you guide who you're going to talk to about what. And at the end, where you might present, here are the kinds of themes I'm getting in the reaction. Remember, this is their report. So if you can get 2 30-minute slots with them, great. If you can't, do them last. Different personality types. Some people like to gaze at their favorite patch of blue sky. And you'll give them all these materials and they'll push them aside and they'll look at that favorite patch of blue sky. Let them do that. Just ask them questions that brings them back to reality. Other folks like to have very analytical and have lots of things in front of them, and you're all ready for that. The point is have a plan for each. The more you know the personality type of the person you're interviewing, the more prepared you are for how much you're going to have to either guide their discussion or inject energy into it so that you fill up a whole 30 minutes, or pull energy away from them so they don't go over. The point is you want to make it a positive experience. You want them to learn something new. Now, I have a bullet there at the bottom, bow tie by stealth. One tool that many of us in risk management use, which can be very powerful but also cumbersome, is the bow tie. Just in case you don't know what that is, basically with a bow tie analysis, you put your risk, event, or condition in the middle. You put all the sources or causes on the left. You have how it impacts your strategy on the right, and then you put your preventative and mitigative controls in between. This was originally developed in the 1970s. It's a tool for hazard analysis. It talked about energy flows and that kind of stuff, but it's useful for looking at higher levels of risk too. The problem with it is if you take a bow tie analysis into an interview and you've only got 30 minutes, you'll be lucky if you get one done in half an hour. It's just too intrusive a tool, and it's there's too much structure around it. But if you have this model in your head, it can help you make your interviews better. So let me give an example. Let's suppose I'm in an interview and someone mentions, say it's the immediate head of people and culture, and they mention there are difficulties with the labor market. Well, I'm thinking, that's not really a risk. It's something that's happening today. It's a fact. And it feels like a source. It feels like something that might drive future uncertainty. So I will probe and I will say, okay, so it's a fact the market's getting tighter. So what's the uncertain thing in the future? And they say, well, we might not be able to attract capable resources to our business, especially in, say, new graduate engineers, because there aren't as many graduates and everybody's competing for them. And then I might say, okay, so how would that hurt? What are some other things that might cause that event to happen? And that's where we might get into some other related risks. And then I'll say, okay, and we care about this, why? And we'll talk a little bit about impacts. And depending on how far we want to go, they may or may not get into details about preventative and mitigative controls. But what we've done is use that rather than say, no, 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 that's not a risk. We'll just use that to guide other questions. Similarly, if I'm on a risk workshop and this happens a lot, and someone says, business continuity planning, that's a risk. No, it's not. It's a particular kind of mitigative control. It's not a risk. So what is it there to mitigate? Ah, you're concerned about coordinated cyber attacks. Okay, that comes from these sources. That can have this impact, and here are the other things we're doing. So you see, Scott, what I'm doing here is I'm starting with in my head with whatever they say and using that as a pathway to build out a proper description of the risk where I understand the sources, the impacts, and the risk itself.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not recommending sharing the bow tie with interviewees and trying to populate it. Just use it as a model in your mind to help you probe. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's a preventative control they've raised. All right, that's the fact today of the state of controls. What's the thing they're really talking about? What's the future uncertainty? So some other questions and tips about managing interviews. Um, Keep your initial questions as open-ended as possible and use your props and tools to gently guide the discussion. Again, you want them to feel like they're in control of the conversation. Let them talk about what they want to talk about, but gently guide them to topics you need to know about. Keep your questions as open-ended unless you're really drilling into something specific, like the status of major initiative. But other than that, you want to ask them questions like why, what happens next, who else is concerned about this, what are the ways this might play out in the next few years, um, how might it impact the strategy, and how might we respond. Very open-ended. What if questions, particularly with relate to dynamic elements of the environment or the possible combined impacts of risks. What if you've raised these two risks, what if they happen at the same time? How would we react to that? How is, and I'm going to use a Scott word, fragility, a factor in this discussion? Active listening. So we all know what active listening is. That's where we paraphrase back to other folks what we've heard. Stephen Covey talked about a lot in his books. It's helpful to signal that you're listening and engaged, but it's also can actually turning it into a problem-solving discussion. It might generate some new ideas, and here's why. Hearing your own thought echoed back removes some cognitive loading on you. So when you're talking and expressing what you think, you're going through um, a journey in terms of translating that into words that will be understood by the other party. But once you hear that back from the other party, now that all that burden is gone, and you can start to listen and really think about what you've just said, and that might lead to some new ideas or some new triggers that turn into a problem-solving discussion. So what you're saying is you're concerned about the fact that there's a lack of new graduates in engineering. We really need them for our program going forward, and you're concerned that that might impact our competitive performance. Have I got that right? And while you're saying that, you're listening to, they're also thinking, yeah, and I wonder what do we know about our competitors about this? I wonder if I should be looking into what their salaries are like and whether they're competitive with us. That's where you want their mind to go.
Yep.
And then silence. And if you were at my webinar on risk workshops, this will
Mhm.
ring true, but it's also true with interviews. There is a temptation if you ask a question and it doesn't get answered right away to fill in the silence, to rephrase the question, to suggest possible answers to the question because the silence is uncomfortable for you. Don't do it. If you're in an interview and you answer a question and the other party doesn't say anything, just sit there and stare at them like an idiot until they speak. Silence is a very powerful tool to get people talking. Don't talk too much. Use silence and listen. In the end, despite what I just said about making them uncomfortable without silence, um, you want it to be a positive experience. You want them to learn something new as a consequence of your conversation. So um, absolutely um, keep that in mind. You want them to enjoy the experience, want them to learn something, you want them to feel good. Of course, one way to make them enjoy the experience is to use it as a way to, I mean, people people, generally speaking, don't argue with their own data, and people think their own conclusions are smart. So being listened to for a long period makes people like you and like your process and like your department.
I'll jump in here a little bit.
Sure.
I've done a structured interview process many times in the past before for a completely different application to understand buyers' journeys by talking to customers and people who were almost customers and understanding where their thought process was. And I want to emphasize and back you up on the idea that um, when people are listened to for a half hour and when they get to express their point of view and express what they've been thinking and the conclusions that they've been coming to, um th- in my experience they typically really enjoyed the process. Like it was maybe a little bit hard to schedule, and then when the half hour was up, it was impossible to get them to shut up because they were legitimately having a good time with it. So this is to emphasize that for people who might be introverted or scared about getting in front of other people or scared about having these going out and having conversations is good for one personality type, but some personality types might not might feel that uncomfortable. It's typically an experience where not only does somebody not feel encumbered, they typically welcome it by the end. I think that you're nodding. I feel that that's your experience too.
Well, I actually want to extrapolate a little bit from what you just said. So one thing that's different between what you're talking about, customer journey mapping and that kind of stuff, is this is that this is a excuse for them to talk about stuff they don't normally talk about.
Right.
Like, just leaders don't have a lot of platforms to talk about, again, ways we might fail or uncertainty or all that stuff. It's just not normally a part of their day. So there's a and you'll find that some of them, especially after they trust you, will use the time to complain about their peers or their boss. They will, and that's fine. And once they start to do that, that's a win. That means that they trust you and they trust the process, and they believe that this is confidential, and you'll build it
Mhm.
into a broader picture and use it to help improve things in the organization. So it's not only the fact that people get to hear themselves talk about what they believe, Scott, which is your point, but also
Mhm.
they get to talk about stuff they don't normally people don't normally ask them about. You'll be
I
surprised how much potential energy, how much that spring is wound for some individuals.
Well, obviously, and depending on how much venting happens, you could have a thing where you go to the CEO at the end after that second session and go, okay, the bad news is that everybody thinks everybody else is the biggest risk to the organization, right? Do you ever use last question on this? One of the techniques I found in the spirit of open-ended questions for interviews is this kind of like silence, but just the simple "what else" with nothing else attached to it. Is that another when we're talking about one thing that they've identified and just kind of popping off the cue of the stuff that's on their mind and that's wound them up, right? Just kind of and what else and what else and what else. Is that useful as well?
Huge. So um, there's a tendency, because of the way we're educated, to conclude there's one answer. Someone asks you a question, what are the key risks, say human capital risks of the business, and they give an answer and they figure they're done. So what you're
Yeah.
trying to do is encourage the next answer. What else? What are the other threats in that category? What other things are significant? And then once we're done, the discussion is there anything that's not on this figure, that's not in our universe, that you've identified or thought about? Like, what else is there? Or is there anything else you want to talk to me about? I mean, um, really, those kinds of questions are really uh, necessary.
Yep.
Then we need to do something with what we learned. So tabulate the results. Usually, something like a matrix is best. So I will keep detailed notes from my discussions, but I'll also load the highlights into something like a spreadsheet or some kind of risk management tool where I can record and tabulate the results. That might involve translating words they use into numbers, or some kind of something that allows you to use a model to identify the big ones, the ones that are coming up. But you also need to take the source into account. So weight the views of those closest to the risk more. They know more about the state of the thing. I mean, that seems obvious, but you know, the view of your general counsel and the view of your head of labor relations on risk of, say, labor conflict are going to be very different guess which one of them is going to have a better picture about what the real risks are. No
So
offense to
more,
general counsels out there, by the way.
so more or less, this is you're kind of doing just a weighted count of how many times things come up, basic at its most basic level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Don't imply accuracy through precision. So make sure your model isn't too cute. Too many decimal places, too many gradations, because you've collected a bunch of numbers and you get to add them up and average them and stuff. There may be a temptation to
Yeah.
produce a report that says the risk is 3.64257, because that's what's in cell, D14 of your spreadsheet. Don't imply precision where there's an there. You're going to get at very least some very awkward questions about why you rated this one higher than that one. I mean, um, I, I've run into that a lot. Um, Static versus evolving risk description. So let's suppose in 2021, you say ran a infrastructure organization, and there was a risk called degrading asset condition. We've got a bunch of
Mhm,
assets all over the place, and the risk is that they're they're deteriorating at an unknown rate. So
mhm,
that's one of your key risks: the uncertain rate of deterioration of your assets. Then you do some more exploration, and somebody proposes, well, in fact, there's two risks there. Inadequate asset information. So the risk that our information about assets might be wrong, and the risk that our assets might be reaching the end of life and might start to deteriorate in terms of performance. And those are two separate risks. Don't be afraid to recast and evolve your risk description. Risk can beget two, or multiple risks can come together and recombine. It's whatever tells the story best and most efficiently, but don't feel a slave to your taxonomy or structure when you're preparing things like board reports. You just want it to produce a narrative that makes sense and tells the story. Always circle back to the SME and get reactions. So if I've got one of my risks that relates to human capital, I will make sure I fly it beside the chief human resources officer before I show it to the chief executive. So always make sure you go through that step. You're not doing this to make enemies. You're doing this to tell their story effectively. And then final checkpoint, of course, can be the chief executive. And this is where, and I promised I wouldn't mention it, but I am going to mention again, this is where a workshop is most effective. So the best case, and this is what I do with 90% of my clients, I'm taking through this process now. I'll complete the interviews. I'll identify a set of candidate risks that seem to be the key themes in their interviews. I'll check them with the CEO to make sure that they're the ones they can accept that those are the key ones. And then I'll convene a workshop with risk descriptions partially pre-populated from the interviews, where the executives will actually apply the criteria to assess the risks and will look for alignment and share ideas. So that is sort of the gold standard in this: interviews, then workshop as your checkpoint. The
after
last
you're
best.
oh forgive me, after you're done going back to Rob Quayle's uh um seminar on risk workshops, if you want to explore workshops any more than that, or you think that that might be a good idea for your company, not that he would ever promote himself, but Rob, you facilitate risk workshops for people, do you not? If somebody decided that that might be a good idea for their company.
No.
No, okay.
Yeah, I do. I do. I do, but it is just one of me. There's also a chapter in our book about how to do this. But yeah,
Mhm.
I can't. What I prefer actually to do is to train people on how to run risk workshops rather than do them myself. So I'll teach you how to do
Gotcha.
it. But yeah, if you want to know more about that, I think my email address will be
Available
at
at
the end of this.
fine Amazon.com outlets everywhere, by the way.
So my next slide is about the ultimate dilemma about key risk reporting. This can be tricky. The way you choose to structure your report will very much be a function of the organization you work for, their culture, what they're used to seeing, whether they're an organization that has quantitative skepticism versus enthusiasm. They like numbers or do they not trust them? Do they like texts or pictures? Do they like pre-read stuff? Lots of detail. But one thing everyone should think about this: there's a tension between the desire to get the message quickly communicated in relative terms versus the problem of oversimplification. No matter how great a job you do in summarizing, communicating, the reality of risk for your organization is much more complex. So there's a dilemma: how detailed, how much to use models, how to communicate their limitations. And let me take a notorious example. This is, of course, much maligned heat map. Very, very common way of summarizing key risk conclusions to board levels. Very, very controversial. There are, if we go on LinkedIn right now, we'll find people arguing pro and con for heat maps. So here's why. And I apologize for those who attended last year's Connect conference, because this was part of my What's Wrong with ERM keynote, but it's such a great example, I have to take through it again. So you can fast forward 2 minutes if you were at that session. I saw this posted on LinkedIn about a year and a half ago. And it was posted by a risk expert as a way to convince others to use their services to demonstrate how good they are at ERM. So they have investment A with one risk in this red zone, and investment B with a whole bunch of risks in the green and yellow zones. They're saying, pick which one is riskier. The only thing more horrifying than the question was the fact that there were a lot of risk experts from around the globe who tried to answer the question. There are so many problems with this. First of all, a risk is not a combination of impact and probability. A risk is associated with a range of outcomes with different probabilities. A risk is a curve, not a point. Usually, when we plot risks as a point on a heat map, we do so to simplify for communication purposes. And we plot some defined point, maybe a worst credible. But no one should be fooled into thinking that by looking at that point, they know enough about the risk in order to make any kind of decision whatsoever. Secondly, we don't know that the risks in these two maps are like for like in terms of granularity, scale, and scope. So you might be able to reframe or redefine several of the risks in risk B so they are part of the same higher level risk, resulting in ratings like point A. Next, risks aren't discrete things. They operate as a network. The occurrence of one risk event affects other risks. You can't just add them up. So heat maps have their very limited purposes, but this kind of decision making is most definitely not one of them. You need, if you're going to use a heat map, and I use them to as a simple way to convey one aspect of priority. But I always make it clear and explicit that a heat map is a gross oversimplification of what is a more complicated reality, and you certainly can't make any decisions based on it. This is just something to help you keep all the risks straight in your head and think about which ones are we more concerned about impact, and for which ones are we more concerned about likelihood. Here's something that's a little bit better. I mentioned on the previous slide that risks interact, and that risk management is really a dynamic ecosystem. So the risk of occurrence of one event can affect others. So you can build something like this if that interrelationship is something you want to communicate. So suppose you have outsourced IT operations. This risk here, flawed outsourcing governance, could impact other things on the figure. This is just one way to depict it. This is the kind of modeling that risk managers should be doing and incorporating into the way they help the CEO tell their story to the board. But again, like the other model I shared, this has its limitations too. There is no perfect way to depict risk. So what should I include in my risk report? Well, my first version, I said, was just a narrative that tells the CEO story. Mostly words, very few numbers, just prose. Over time, in my experience, it came to evolve. So now I'm going to take you through all the things you could potentially put in a key risk report. And might be thinking about this after you've been through this a few iterations. You need a clear definition of the risk that may or may not use scenarios to define them. You give a risk rating, maybe some trends or history. Where was it last quarter or last month, last year? KRIs if you have them. How controllable is it? Is this an internal or an external risk? Bow tie elements. So what are the sources of the risk and how might it impact the strategy? What recent events happened? So what's happened in the last 6 months that either increased or decreased the risk? And what's coming up? Our thing from the risk calendar. Our key treatments or controls are what is our treatment strategy for managing this risk summarized? And how much assurance do we have over those things? Our planned initiatives. So what are we going to do in the next period between this report and the next to manage the risk differently? Who owns it? So who's keeping an eye on it? And the management discussion. So some kind of summary, maybe from the owner, if they want to tell their story straight to the board about how they're managing this. So this, and if you got your screenshot ready, you want your full inventory of all the things that could go in a key risk report, this is pretty much the kitchen sink.
About how many key risks are usually come up for discussion after an interview process like this? Is it a billion of them? Is it you're narrowing it down to a certain number? How many do we talk about typically?
Depends on the size, scope, scale of the organization. What you want, what it is a relative discussion. It's the ones that are most significant. You
Mm,
want something in the order of 10.
okay.
So I'm working with a very large organization where their key risk report just talked about 4 key risks, but these 4 things are 4 existential threats to their business they're dealing with every day, and they wanted to tell the story about just those 4. I have another client
Sure.
organization where their key risk report covers about 15. They are a large multinational company. They want their board to understand the complexity of all the different things they're dealing with. They've just got a lot of balls in the air at the same time, and they want to tell that story. So there's no really right answer. The focus is, I mean, again, this is part of your conversation with the chief executive. How can we best tell your story about the risks to the strategy and how you're managing them?
Got it.
So final words. Like most things in ERM, the process is more important than the product. In this case, and you'll notice I've shown you lots of examples of process and not much on product. In this case, it's about having a whole mess of conversations with all the people in the expensive suits about risks and how we're managing them. So seize that opportunity, take your hall pass and run with it. Different audiences have different needs. You want to structure the report so it's likely to lead to productive conversation. Think about the questions that your board may ask. And think about what an ideal conversation between board and CEO might be about these risks and try and structure the report so it will enable that. As I said on the previous couple of slides, risk is complicated. You need to make it easy to understand while not oversimplifying things. Make sure they understand the limitations of your model. Evolve and learn. And that by that I mean people get bored. Try new things, make your reportings exciting. One source of idea that I use all the time, every time the World Economic Forum comes out with their annual risk report, I I devour it. Not necessarily because of the content, but because they're always coming up with new ways to convey information about risk and uncertainty with their little explosions and spider diagrams and categories and that kind of thing. So keep finding new ways to make your report more and more engaging. And then finally, you want to start non-threatening as possible. So your first key risk report is going to use their words as much as possible, not yours. You want to keep this as you want people to trust that what they tell you will find its way in the report, presented in the way that they intended. And a good way to do that is to make sure you use their expressions and their words in your report, and they'll recognize them and they'll love you for it. And finally, if in the end, no one reads it, people don't understand it, then it's not accomplishing much. The end.
One on the I think you said something at the very end there that is a bullet point, but it's very important. You mentioned using other people's quotes directly in your analysis. Whether I've done this with anonymized quotes before, and I want to highlight what you said. The difference between really making something come alive and not is the exact words that other people used. Maybe you could just extrapolate a little bit more on how you've used that to effect in the past, because I think that that's a really powerful point.
Yeah, and in my current practice as a lone wolf independent consultant, where I'm doing this a lot of different organizations, I may not be all that familiar with the company, its language, its history, its culture, that kind of stuff. So I'll make a point of making sure I capture some of the phrases and terms they use.
Yeah.
For example, I'm working with a client right now where everybody uses the term technology debt,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
about the
We hear that
obsolescence of their
too.
technology. That's a phrase other people do too, but they use it all the time. So their key risk report has technology debt in it about 20 times, just
Surely.
because they recognize their phrase. So it's a way of expressing a concept efficiently because you're using lingo that they're using. It makes your report seem more credible, but also if people recognize their words coming out of you, they'll immediately acknowledge your brilliance. I mean, I sound like I'm being flippant here, but I'm
No,
not.
that's
Um,
absolutely right.
particularly folks who've had long successful careers and have climbed to senior ranks in a large organization, they believe in themselves, and they trust their own brains and their own mouths, and if they see their ideas coming out of your products, they're going to trust you more quickly. It's important sales technique.
Yes. I wanted to ask, I think we have time for one question here, and I wanted to ask broadly, where I think people's minds are going to be on this, because this technique is going to be pretty fresh to people, right? There's not a lot of this, I think, commonly happening in ERM right now. And I wanted to ask about the interaction between the interview and workshop techniques that you're advocating here, and more of the techniques of traditional information collection in ERM. You know, normally, and especially we see this a lot as a technology provider, we have there's there's people are aligned in their minds around the technology. You have a risk register, you send out communication to some SMEs, you have them give information on, you know, likelihood and probability. All the things that you're really saying here are, you know, more beside the point, a means to some other end. What is does that get thrown out, or is there still value in some of these traditional processes in ERM with regard to, you know, likelihood and frequency data collection on these things, perhaps to power the interviews? It sounded like you said maybe you take some of this information that normally gets collected as interview prep, for example, or how do these things interact?
Yes. So you'll recall in that slide where I had the 5 or 6 things that I encounter people do all the time as the source for the key risk report. And then the
Hmm.
right-hand side, I had interviews and workshops. And I think what I said is those 4 are still important and necessary things to do. Scrape your
Yes.
data, pull stuff of your ERM system, find out, summarize all your assessments you've gotten within the organization. I'm not saying don't use all that stuff. What I'm saying is that is a ingredient and a enabler of an effective process. But unless you push all that content through people's brains and and record what comes out of their mouths after they're exposed to all that, you haven't really accomplished anything. And again, I mean, a lot of risk managers I talk to, they'll say, I'm not, I'm frustrated because I don't feel like I'm influencing decision making in the organization enough. People don't value me as a trusted advisor. They're not really just doing enough with what I have to offer. But often those are the same people for whom reporting is crunching a bunch of stuff from different sources and sending out emails and writing it up and sending it upstairs. So the answer to the problem is to actually make contact with decision makers. ERM
Yes.
is a contact sport. It's not it's not ping pong, right? You
Right.
know, it's Australian rules football. You are out there interacting with decision makers, and the more you sit down and talk to them, particularly ask them a lot of questions, the more likely it is you're going to get invited to take all that nice data you got from your wonderful GRC solution or whatever else you've got bubbling around, and actually get it applied to real decision making going forward.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. I want to thank my guest, Rob Quail. The book, one more time, Enterprise Risk Management, Today's Leading Research and Best Practices for Tomorrow's Executives. It has a chapter in there on risk workshop facilitation. It has information in there on interviews, and you can go and see Rob's previous Risk at Work episodes at riskconnect.com. We'd like to thank you guys very much for spending a little of your day with us. We hope you got tremendous value out of what Mr. Quayle has to offer, and we will see you back on the next installment of Risk at Work. Take care.